Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of the LitRPG podcast. I'm Ramon Mejia, here to bring you the latest LitRPG news, reviews, and author interviews. This week is episode number 286 of the show, and I got 3 new reviews for you folks at home. Just as a quick update, Mechanical Crafter book, which is published about a month ago, has been doing amazingly well, and what I think everyone who's given it a chance and who's read the book, and especially if you were kind enough to leave a review, those were really important in helping to get the word out about any book you like. So if you were nice enough to do so, I appreciate it. If you haven't had a chance to, please consider leaving a nice review for the book on your local Amazon page so that other readers can have a chance to get a chance to read it. And of course, if you haven't had a chance to read it, we'll have a link in the show notes so you can go give it a shot. It's a fun story about a mechanical person who's a crafter in a fantasy industrial-ish kind of world. So there's a little steampunk-ish element there too. So it's kind of fun. Okay, on to the rest of the show, of course, though. This week, I will be reviewing for you 3 books: Renegade, Underdog, book number 8. Also, The Third Apocalypse, a generic reincarnation apocalypse, epic LitRPG fantasy adventure with a system, Regressor, book number 1. Then we also have Connection Unknown, Builder's Legacy, book number 1, written by the amazing Michael Chatfield. And so those are the books we're reviewing for you this week. Before we get into any of that, of course, we're going to start off with some LitRPG news. Now, not many news stories, so we're actually going to head right into the out now and upcoming LitRPG review section where I just tell you about the stuff that's come out recently since the last episode of the podcast, including ebooks, audiobooks, and ebooks that are going to be up for pre-order for the next couple months here. And that's going to start off with the stuff that is out now. This is going to include The Initialization, a live stream dungeon crawl called The Rise of the Winter Wolf, book number 1. So out for you to enjoy. The Defiance of the Fall, book number 5 is out. Of course, if you're a fan of this, you already probably know this. It has I think 1,000 reviews or so already. So also out is Pantheon, Den of Thieves. The Alpha Physics, book number 5, another popular post-apocalyptic LitRPG story. Out for you to enjoy, as is Summoner Shadow, number 2 by D.B. King. Dungeon Core Online Remasters, book of 3 is out for you as well. The Wandering Inn, book number 6, ebook finally came out. I actually reviewed the audiobook version of this particular book last week, last time on the podcast, and it wasn't available at that time. So since the ebook has finally come out, and I think this is one of the first examples of where that this book is not doing as well as it should as an ebook necessarily. Part of them because nobody knows that it actually came out, or it could just be that the audiobook has snatched up a good portion of the of those particular sales. But from past looking at other reviews that have accumulated by now for this particular series in particular, that late release really has seemed to affect how many people are finding it at this point. But the audiobook has tons of great reviews. So I mean, there you go. Also out now is Cowboy Necromancer, book number 3, as is the 3rd book in the Houndsman series. Also the 2nd book in We Hunt Monsters by Aaron Oster. Then we have, now this one was actually a real big surprise to me. This is Alter World, book number 6. This is the 8th book in the Play to Live series, also known as the Alter World series. This is a Russian translation book written by D. Russ. And I'll be honest, I thought this was a dead series. The last book number 7, came out in 2016. So it's been 6 years since anything in this series came out. And so this is book 8. I don't know that if it just took this long to get it translated, or had it been written and the author just written in Russian and it got translated in English. Either way though, if you're a fan of the series, the Play to Live series, and a lot of people have been, the 8th book is out for you to enjoy. So go check it out if you're as surprised as me to see an 8th book in a kind of a 6-year-old series. Also out is the 3rd book in the System Apocalypse Australia series. This is the kind of side series in Tao Wong's System Apocalypse universe. This one takes place in Australia. It was written by KT Hanna and Tao Wong. And this is the 3rd book. We reviewed book number 1 in the series. Really enjoyed it, had a really good time, but I can't recommend it enough. It's really nice, written by the amazing KT Hanna. The main character actually is a mom taking care of 2 kids, and so there's a nice little family dynamic that's going on there in addition to the action adventure, kind of this RPG apocalypse thing going on. Also out is, now this one actually isn't getting a lot of press, probably because it's kind of a thing. It's an anthology a short story anthology collected together by Sean Oswalt. He has like, I want to say 30 people. Yeah, 30, more than 30 authors who have contributed short stories to this. They're all lit RPG stories, but they're not set in any one particular subgenre. I think they're dungeon horror, fantasy, sci-fi. Who knows what else is in there? I haven't had a chance to read it. It is a pretty lengthy, collection of stories from some very popular authors, some who are a little less well known. But go give it a shot. It's not, unfortunately, not on Kindle Unlimited at this point, so that might deter, unfortunately, some readers. But it's probably one of those things that you have to do with revenue sharing or something between all these different authors or whatever the case is. But, go give it a shot. I made the purchase myself just to support Sean Oswald and all these other authors who I happen to enjoy reading. Also out is Battle Mage Farmer, book number 1. The Anora Unleashed, book number 4 in the series, Rise of the Necromancer. This one is apparently a pirate-based LitRPG series, and it's actually done pretty well if you look at the number of reviews per book. So that's great for them. I'm not really into pirate stuff myself, though, so I've never given it a chance to read, but a lot of good reviews on it. Also out is book 7 in the Eternal Dominion series. Also book number 7 in Condition Evolution, and a new book from Mountain Dew Press called Top Hat Express, a lit RPG adventure, Vaudevillian, book number 1. I think there are some superhero themes and elements to the story. But give it a shot. Everything from Mountain Dew Press has really been quite entertaining. Also out is the 6th book of the Salvo series. And there we go. That's all the stuff I know that's as an ebook. Now into audiobooks that are out now for you to enjoy. That's going to include Vaudevillian Villain, book number 1, which we just talked about from Mountain Dew Press. The Libro Hexer Wolfman Warlock, book number 2, is out as an audiobook as well. Also, the 10th Realm, book number 10, which talks about the 8th Realm. I know that's a little confusing, but it's the 10th book in the series. A couple of them were broken up in part 1 and part 2s. So that's why we're getting a little, differentiation between the realms and the actual book number. But it's the 10th Realm, 10th book in the series. But it really incorporates, it's called the 8th Realm as the title. So there you go. The Battle Mage Farmer, book number 1, Domestication, is also out as an audiobook. Apocalypse 2, Still Left Out by the System, out as an audiobook as well. Player Reach the Top, book number 7 is out, as is Alpha, book number 4, called Alpha Resplendent. The 4th book in the the Singularity Online series, called Primal Sorcery, is out. The Shaman's Call, book number 2, Spirit Song, out as an audiobook. Bio Dungeon Omnibus is out for you to enjoy. And again, this is a recommendation for me just because I enjoy both authors, Jeffrey Falcon Logue, who writes the Slam Dungeon Chronicle series, and Jonathan Brooks, who writes a number of other dungeon core series and stories. And they combine their talents for this particular series, which takes place inside a human body. So the dungeon is actually a part of the human body. So you're getting kind of this shrunken view of the human form with a dungeon core element in there. There are also some real life events. I reviewed book number 1 in the series. I enjoyed it. Just never end up picking book number 2 and 3, but I can get all 3 for the price of 1 credit. So a lot of good, interesting stuff there to enjoy if you want to give it a shot. Apocalypse Online, book number 3 is out as an audiobook, as is Immersion Online, book number 3. Also Early Access, Cuesta Online, out for you to enjoy. Dungeon Crawler Carl, book number 5, which has done amazingly well as an ebook, and I believe it topped the charts on Amazon or Audible as a pre-order. I think it hit like top 5 or something in multiple genres, subgenres, and also on the main page, I think. So, and that's just as a pre-order. So if you've enjoyed this series, there's an amazing amount of wonderful nation from Jeff Hayes and the crew at Soundblue Theater. Also out now is the 8th book in the Bad Guy series called Trick of the Night. Also Reality Benders, book number 8, Devourer. As is the Dungeon Core Online 3rd book in the series. Again, the ebook and the audiobook are out at the same time. Defiance of the Fall, book number 5, is out as an audiobook. Also the Apocalypse Nights, book number 2, out as an audiobook. And that is it for the ebook and audiobooks since the last episode of the podcast. On to upcoming LitRPG. And I actually reduced this list just a bit. I used to do 3 months. And there was just at the 3-month mark, a lot of books would just like change their release dates so much. And it was just such a hassle to try to go back that far and try to keep up with those books. I'm like, okay, I'll just keep it to 2 months. So I'll do this month is June and we'll do July on this, and I'll just do 2 months from now on. And I figure, okay, that's plenty of time to plan out your own personal release schedule if you're an author or if you're a reader and you need to figure out where your favorite books are going to be coming in to plan out your purchase schedule. I feel like that's a good enough time period to get that done. So we'll start off with the book that's coming out on June 4th, which is the Whispering Crystals, book number 4. Also on June 7th, it'll be Chrysalis. Will be out, which is a new series and a new book from a different author. June 7th is going to be Fey Nexus, book number 3. On June 8th, it'll be the Necrotic Apocalypse, book number 4, also known as the Zombie Apocalypse, written by David Petrie. I believe it goes through Mountain Dale Press. Don't quote me. I think it is. But it's a wonderful series. I enjoyed book number 1 and 2. Haven't read book number 3 or 4, unfortunately. Also out on June 9th is going to be the book 3 in Rising Insanity, the Outcast in Another World series. On June the 14th, it'll be the Primal Hunter, book number 2. June the 14th as well, it'll be Nova Terra, the Titan series, book number 10. On June 15th, now this one's a little bit wheelie as far as like a solid release date. The Dragonheart series, book number 15, which is a kind of a LitRPG Wuxia series. It kind of just publishes when the author's ready. So even though it says June 15th, it very well might come out sometime sooner if the author just feels like releasing it or actually finishes the script. But as of now, it has a pre-order release date of June 15th. Also on June 15th, it'll be Dragon Core Chronicles, book number 3 by Lars McMullen. On June 16th, it'll be Bandits of Dorkham, book number 2. On June 18th, it'll be The Bad Guys, book number 9. June 19th, it'll be Mayor of Mythos and a Isekai LitRPG series. On June 19th, it'll be Master Hunter K, book number 3. On June 20th, it'll be Crafter's Tale, book number 2. On June 21st, The Guardian of Astrofall, book number 3. On June 21st, it'll be Monster Haven, book number 1, Reluctant Dungeon, which is a new series from JD Astra. On June 22nd, it'll be Silence, Unbound, book number 2, which is a follow-up to a very popular book they just came out, which is called, I believe it's Dissonance. So this will be book number 2 coming out just later this month. June 23rd, it'll be the second book in the Towers and Tokens series written by Harmon Cooper. On June 24th, it'll be Skyrealms Online, book number 6. On June 27th, Apocalypse Knights, book number 3. On June 28th, The Nexus Games, book number 2. June 28th as well, it'll be He Who Fights with Monsters, book number 6. On June 30th, it'll be Sentenced to Troll, book number 5. On June 30th, it'll be Kairos, book number 2. On July 11th, it'll be the second book in the Immortal Shells Creation series. There we go. By Kevin Sinclair. It'll be July 5th for Harbinger of Destruction. Never heard of it, but it says it's LitRPG. On July the 5th, it'll be the Apocalypse Online, book number 4. On July 5th, it'll be the follow-up to Arise series, book number 2, called Dark Crusader. Book number 1 did tremendously well. On July 12th, it'll be The Great Core's Paradox, a LitRPG adventure by someone I've never heard of. On July the 12th, it'll be World of Magic, book number 4. July the 13th, it'll be Vaudeville Villain, book number 2. Book number 1 coming out again just recently. So book number 2 will be out next month in July on the 13th. July the 15th, it'll be Oath of a Mad Dog. On July 18th, it'll be In the System, book number 4, Overlord of the Dungeon. On July the 19th, it'll be a new series called Sentinel, A Troubled World, book number 1. On July 19th, The Legend of Randalee Ghost Town, book number 3. This one was pushed out from a June release date to a July 19th release date, so it is what it is. Unfortunately, it got pushed back. On July 25th, it'll be Reality Benders, book number 9, The Mysteries of the Relict Pyramid. On July 26th, it'll be Apocalypse Unleashed, a new series. July 26th, it'll be the second book in the Cultivator versus System series, book number 2. This one kind of had mixed reviews for book number 1, but again, still technically qualifies as LitRPG, so I don't try to discriminate as long as you're actually qualifying as LitRPG. There you go. I'll put you in the list. On July 31st, it'll be Third Apocalypse, Volume 2 of a generic Reincarnation Apocalypse Regressor, book number 2. We're reviewing, of course, the first book in the series on the podcast today, but the second book comes out on July 31st, and that is actually it. That's the end of our upcoming list of stories. On to new releases. and reviews. Okay, first review for the week is going to be Renegade, Underdog, book number 8, written by Alexei Osachuk. It is 543 pages, $6.99. As of this review, it is not available on Kindle Unlimited. And here's the author's description. The battle with the horde of necromorphs is lost. Foreston has become overrun with dark fiends. The Foxfolk have been forced to abandon their homes and seek salvation on the far side of the narrow lake. With its main city lost, the Order of Monster Hunters finds itself on the brink of destruction, and now deprived of their chief ally, the Gnomes, are left all alone to take on the army of the Steel King. Eric's attempts to halt this foe's advance have come to naught. The Alric the Heartless and the other dark primordials are simply too powerful. To cover his friend's retreat, Eric makes use of forbidden magic, for which the Great System strips him of his rank as Magister and declares him apostate. In spite of the crushing defeat and grievous wounds, Eric's will is not yet broken, and although he's become a renegade in the eyes of yesterday's friends and allies, Eric will keep up the fight against darkness. So there we go. Now, full disclosure, I received a bad copy for review, and I purchased a copy when it became available. This is the final book in this particular series, and it actually takes some interesting twists and turns in the stories, but ultimately ends like I sort of expected. A lot of these Russian stories kind of have this ending where essentially the good guy has to win to some degree. Now, like, all the things have to resolve, and if the good guy doesn't kind of win in one form or another, maybe not totally or completely, I felt like the readers who followed the story for 8 books would absolutely rebel. And so with that in mind, I wasn't surprised with the particular twist. I was surprised with the way that the main character kind of overcame the odds at the very end. I was like, okay, that I see where that was set up before. I get where that happens. A lot of times with the Russian series, like, you feel like they're forced a little bit. Is what it is, but it's still like an entertaining ride for the entire 8 books. And I think fans of the series have really enjoyed the journey. I think this one is one of the higher rated in the series because it actually has a really good job of tying those storylines up, creating conclusions. The author at the end also notes that even though this series is ending, he might continue the main character's story arc in another series at some point in the future, but for now, this is kind of it. So I was happy to see all the big story threads cleared up, and it's an entertaining read. I think if you've come this far, I'd feel satisfied with the ending, and that's about as much as you can ask for a series as long as this. 8 books is a tremendously long series for this kind of thing. So for me, it gets a nice score of 7.4 out of 10. Good. Lost a little because the end was a little predictable, but I mean, I think you kind of expect the good guy to kind of win, right? So it's not that far out of the realm of understanding, but still entertaining journey along the way. So for me, still a good review score. That's Renegade Underdog, book number 8, with a score of 7.4 out of 10. Next up is going to be Third Apocalypse, a generic reincarnation apocalypse epic LitRPG fantasy adventure with a system, also called Regressor, book number 1, written by Wolf and Caliban. It is 583 pages. It is $4.99, and it's available on Kindle Unlimited. Here is the author's description. Decades ago, the world was changed by the arrival of the system. One day, monsters spawned across the world, gateways to dungeons appeared everywhere, and the blue screens heralded the ends of days. The apocalypse, the ruin of the world. Amongst the ruins of the world, they survive. The players. They granted power. Those granted power by the system and led by the second regressor, the King of Crows. He who mastered the system learned the truth of the apocalypse and seized the keys of absolute authority. But even a king cannot stop the fall of mankind. No power is absolute, and an end is eventual, the final calamity and coming of disaster. To fight the overwhelming power of a mad god, the mark of the regressor will be passed on. Jax Nolan is picked as the successor, the man destined to go back to the beginning, back to the start of the apocalypse and the advent of the system, and become the hero of the story. Okay, this is a pretty good regressor story. And if you don't know what a regressor story is when somebody goes back to an earlier period in their life with the foreknowledge that they'd gained in living it. So it's like you're 80, 90 years old, and you go back to when you were 12. or in this case, the main character lives to the end of the apocalypse, or the world's end, and he is sent back to an earlier point of life, in this case, at the beginning of the apocalypse, with that foreknowledge to some degree. And I describe how that's a little bit different in this particular story. But that's what a Regressor story is, a chance to relive your life with future information so you can avoid mistakes, take different life paths, change history potentially. And it's a very appealing kind of subgenre on its own. But you add in the RPG apocalypse aspect of it, and it kind of bumps things up, gives it some nice quantifiable progression points, and it's a really enjoyable kind of combination. I've read a lot of manhwa and online webcomics with this kind of thing going on, and I've always enjoyed them tremendously. I will say that this particular story had a rougher start for me. The first 20% is really focused on the end of the apocalypse. There's a lot of action in there, and it's supposed to set up like the major characters in the apocalypse for the series potential. Like it names drop a bunch of people, King of Crows, the Queen of Swords, I think, or something. And it goes out of its way to kind of describe the end of the world and a few battles to kind of pick up the pacing. For me, I felt like it was kind of a waste. Not that it was poorly written or anything, but like, I am not going to remember all those characters' names for the rest of the story. Like I remember one or two, but I felt like it would have been a better time of like, just giving a few really big name characters and then reminding readers of who they are if they come across them later in the actual series when the main character is regressing and going on through. And especially if you're going to try to use that to set up, the things they're going to happen in book 2 or 3 or 4, then there's no way I'm going to remember all those details of that first 20% of book number 1. So for me, it felt like not a waste of time, but it wasn't as engaging as it could have been potentially, because again, I'm not going to remember these characters. I'm not engaged because I don't know who they are. I've not kind of bonded with them through story arcs. It's the end of a story, essentially. It's almost like the end of another book. And so I would have probably appreciated a shorter nugget of that, which is what happens in like a lot of other Regressor stories where we get like, the first 5%, or like just like a chapter, like, this is the end, and he's going to reset at the beginning, and we're going to name up everybody we need as the story progresses on. So small little thing for me. But again, not badly written, just like a thing like, I've seen it done a little bit differently in other books. It is what it is, though. So it just kind of went on a little long for me. But once the story does hit the regression part after the 20% mark, it's really nice. Like it really is. Like the main character goes back to an earlier point of his life. He has his future memories, and he starts using them in regressor like fashion to like improve his odds of survival at the beginning of the apocalypse and potentially save people or help or connect to people who are going to be important in the future. That part I was really engaged in. I always like when a character can be smart and use every advantage, but he's not overpowered in a physical sense or a power sense yet, because it's him taking risks and working hard to get those advantages, even though he has like knowledge of where they exist, like whether there are special abilities or special quests or weapons and armor, whatever the case is. He still has to work really hard to get them because he's not powerful yet. So I always appreciate that power growth and that power curve using your brain and using like the sort of like mental skills that you may have built up in a different life. And that's one of the engaging parts of like a Regressor story in the first place. And so you see that a lot here. He's taking advantage of secrets not yet discovered in this timeline, connecting people that are important in the future. And I kind of like the way that the authors dribbled out this foreknowledge. He's not too overpowered, because that's one of the other sides of the risky parts of doing a Regressor story, that the main character seems overpowered because he knows everything that's going to happen. And the way that the authors in this story kind of combined that is making the main character only know a certain amount of foreknowledge and memories being unlocked about different timelines or different Regressor futures that he's been through as the story progresses. So he sort of unlocks them as he goes on particular quests or interacts with different people, and the story kind of pans away for a little bit to give you like a little small, not even a short story, but like, maybe a couple hundred words about a memory that he's having about this particular interaction with this person or this particular interaction with the situation. And that was a really nice way for me, at least, of like giving little like almost short story backstories for the character or other characters and their potential futures and plot lines. So I really like that particular implementation of the doling out of this foreknowledge that, intricate to a regressor kind of plot line. So I really enjoyed that. For me, that was kind of a highlight. The RPG side of things, the story is really good. It doesn't start out that way necessarily, but after the 30% mark, when the RPG apocalypse is in full motion, you start to see things like levels and stats and classes and lots of quest notifications and plenty of RPG powers and details. So it is doled out through the majority of the story. The story is a little action focused, and so it doesn't really combine those RPG elements within the action itself, which is really good to me. That way the story focuses on the elements that are really engaging for readers. And then afterwards you get a kind of a countdown of like, oh, this is your experience countdown. The main character doesn't level anytime he wants to. He actually has to go to certain locations to level there. And so he might do multiple levels at one time after he's doing a lot of quests. But even like in the in-between times between your combat scenes, you have nice little explorations of what power sets are, how the main character can combine them. We're giving advice to other characters about their particular power sets. So there's lots of like theory building, which a lot of LitRPG readers really enjoy. So lots of nice little stuff and plenty of good RPG crunchiness in the story. Overall, I think the story does a really good job as both an RPG apocalypse story and as a regressor story. If it had been one or the other, I think I probably would have liked it less, but the combination it really appeals to me personally, for the reasons I've stated already. So I had a good time with it. There are plenty of dangers in the story and scenarios and dungeons, and terrible people that the main character just has to deal with. And it was really easy to root for the main character because he's not overpowered, and the way that the authors chose to dribble out that foreknowledge of potential future events really made it so the main character doesn't feel like he's all knowing and all powerful at the beginning of the story, at least. So really had a good time with it. Gets a score of 7.8 out of 10, which is a really good review score. And like, it's nearly great if it had been a few other things that drew it down for me. So nearly great for me, but really good at least. So that's the third Apocalypse, a generic Reincarnation apocalypse epic lit RPG fantasy adventure with a system. A really long title. Regressor book number 1 with a score of 7.8 out of 10. Okay, next up is Connection Unknown, Builder's Legacy book number 1, written by Michael Chatfield. It is 671 pages. It is $5.99. It's available on Kindle Unlimited, and here is the author's description. Luke Tavares has dreamed of joining the vast gaming guilds of the Hypernet. After recently graduating high school, his parents had given him the same ultimatum as his siblings. He has 1 month to get a job to pay for his air, gravity, and water aboard the Dahlia. The freighter needs more hands, but Luke doesn't want to be a trade ship engineer. In Sphere World, he can mine asteroids, build bots, and make weapons to fuel the system-wide war between nodes. As a free player, it is his own credits on the line. But when his opponents are the very guilds that he wishes to join, he's going to have to use every trick he knows to win. Not a bad novel description. I think it really hits the main points of this. The setting in the world of the story, I think, is a little unique. It's not set in our modern world. It's actually set in a future point where humanity has become a spacefaring civilization, and the main character lives on a trade ship that goes to different spaceports, and does trading stuff. And I want to say he's just coming out of high school, so he'd be like 18, 19. And he kind of has to make this life choice of whether he's going to try to be a pro gamer and get in with guilds and play these different video games for cash. Or is he going to take the path that of less resistance, I suppose, and become a trader or a mechanic or an engineer. And it'll be a life of hard work, but it's, guaranteed pay and potential success because he has the available knowledge and resources from his parents and being on that trade ship there. And so there is definitely a sort of a coming of age element to it. But I really liked the fact that it's set in that future world because it really connects to kind of the game world, which is also kind of set in a slightly advanced version of that universe where there's more slight higher technology, but there is space mining, there is crafting, there is base building, but it didn't feel like too far out of the reach of what the main character would sort of be able to know about. So he's able to use his knowledge as somebody who grew up on a trade ship his whole life with, a family business that's running through space on a regular basis to kind of like give knowledge to what he can do in the game, which I was really like, okay, that's a nice little nod that makes that real world setting a little bit different, and it adds a little extra flavor to it. So now going back to the story, I got off track a little bit. This story, it on the game mechanics side of thing, it's not quite lit RPG. I would say it's a little more game lit. There are lots of game mechanics in there, including first person shooter, real time strategy. There's space fighter elements and civilization building elements into the story. I wouldn't quite call them just base building because they do jump around a little bit in getting mines and setting up defense networks and getting resource nodes. And so it feels a little more like Civilization, or one of those games where it's competitive online competition where different players and different guilds are competing for similar resources and conquering one another, and developing, defenses and attack strategies, and there as well. So it's a lot of different game elements, and they combine in a MMO story. We'll say that for now. Now, there are parts of the game elements that just didn't appeal to me, and they're not badly written. I think other people are really going to love them. It's just that I'm not really interested in some of the game types, and that's just because I don't play those games. So I don't like really player versus player stuff necessarily. I wasn't into the kind of competitive resource competition stuff where like characters or guilds are trying to conquer the same nodes and they're competing in that sense. And those were like, really big parts of the story. And I didn't find them boring. They were nicely written. I thought of them more as just good action scenes. But the game mechanics, I was like, oh, this isn't my kind of game. I don't know anything about this. I don't have experience with this, so I couldn't really connect to it in that respect. But for people who love those kind of games, who are like super intensely interested and they love like the sort of meta theory gaming that's going on there, I think they're really going to enjoy that level of it. And I can appreciate the time and effort that goes into it. For me, I liked other aspects of the game elements. I liked the crafting. I loved the resource gathering. I liked not necessarily the actual game guild versus guild conflicts. I liked the kind of out of game talk about it. Like, oh, there are portions of the story that are told from the guild perspectives where like, we need to do this because it's going to get us into this game. We're going to make a ton of money. And they're talking about their different kind of strategies for what they're going to build and how they're going to develop their guild in this new game. And I really liked that competitive because it gave it an element of risk and conflict that you don't really see a ton of. Like there's a lot of like good kind of social conflict, I would say, in that respect. And I really liked the real world storyline. And that's very rare for me because most of the time I tend to focus on being in the game with the characters and that being like the most important aspect of the story, because it's really hard, in my opinion at least, to make the real world connection important, a real world storyline important to what happens in the game, because that's where all the RPG stuff is. That's where the quests are. That's where all your story elements are generally in LitRPG. But the author does a really good job of making the real world storyline engaging and important and has its own kind of tension, which I really like. I'll get into that in a second. And that's seconds now. I really enjoy the real conflict aspects as they had serious tension and consequence what the main character is trying to accomplish in the game. It actually has this is a little, just a tiny bit, so it shows a really in the story, so it's not too big. But the game company is shutting down its game servers forever. And the players who are playing on the last day discover a hidden game within the game that portals them to a new game, and they believe that this is a secret game from the company that they're planning to build and open, and so everybody just spreads around the road. Everybody starts jumping into this new game, and it's super popular. Now, the real life storyline involves that game company having to defend that IP against an internal corporate takeover strike kind of thing. And there's issues of like short selling stocks and the two main developers having to defend it and like them trying to get revenge and kind of taking over, like, because the rest of the shareholders are trying to short sell, they have an opportunity because the game is suddenly doing so well to buy back and like ruin the other people who aren't able to successfully short sell. And then it goes into this courtroom setting and this kind of court issue of like, it's a bunch of interesting stuff. That's a little, it's a little courtroom drama-ish. And I'm like, oh, this is different. You don't really see this kind of courtroom drama in a lit RPG or game lit story. And I was like really engaged with like some of the corporate tactics of it. And I'm not sure if it's going to going to extend into book 2 or book 3, but at least in book 1, I was very entertained by this kind of rural life setting, and of course the consequences for the game stuff, if it continues or not, and of course because it also involves like the guilds. So I like that aspect. Again, it's not gamey at all, but again, very rarely do I enjoy a real life story, storyline as much as this. On the game mechanic side of things, pretty decent. I personally wish there was more RPG elements. I'm always about the RPG progression, classes, sets, stat increases, skill increases, those kind of notifications. I'm always about, I guess I always enjoy like a smaller, personal RPG progression arc where the main character like delves into like the theory building for his character to become powerful. And instead, this is more of a competitive RPG kind of act, like, in like a first-person shooter game or in an action RPG game where you have a set number of like skill tree builds that you can kind of set up at the beginning of a scenario. That's what this is. Players in this MMO, they don't show up as their character necessarily. They have to like log into a bot that exists in the game, and that bot can be kind of customized for what they're going to do for the quest, whether that's going to be a space pilot or a miner or a defender or a dropship trooper, and whatever loadout they're going to have as far as weapons and armor and ammo and grenades and whatever tools they're going to have. And so each time they kill, they have to get a new bot, which is a personal purchase for them. They only get one first free one, and the rest they have to kind of purchase. But they can also respec that new bot. So again, it feels more like first person shooter kind of RPG experience as opposed to like a fantasy or a straight sci-fi single player campaign where you have all these levels and each level gets you a certain number of stat points and skill points and things like that. So I generally prefer, the former to the latter. But hey, like I said, the other game elements are really going to appeal to other people who like more competitive kind of resource gathering, sort of competitive kind of games. There are also other RPG aspects where perfectly fine. Missions are available with options for like conquering nodes, defending nodes, protecting nodes, spaceship fights, drop-off missions, and a ton of more stuff. So there's also crafting, resource gathering elements that play a big part on the game side of the storyline and in conflicts between the guilds because they can sell those resources for real-world credits and money to make a living. And so anytime that aspect is there, there's always going to be like stiff competition between these major guilds that are trying to establish themselves in these kind of games. So that was really nicely done. Overall, I think this is a really kind of nice story. It loses a little bit of enjoyment for me personally, just because I don't play competitive team combat games. But readers who are interested in that genre of game are going to like this more than me. I think they're going to find a ton of enjoyment in this. Other story elements were still very fun for me. Overall, the story was entertaining. The other game elements, I found things to enjoy. I like the author's writing in general, so this is always going to be a good story for me. So for me, it gets a score of 7.4 out of 10. That just loses a little bit. It's like middle of the road good, slightly under, just because of the elements that I mentioned before. But other readers, I think they're going to really think this is like a really good story or a great story, depending on if like the game mechanic styles appeal to you. So just give it a shot. You'll know within like the first easily 10-15% whether this is going to appeal to you or not. That's Connection Unknown, Builder's Legacy, book number 1, with a score of 7.4 out of 10. And that is it for the show, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for listening, for watching. You can follow us on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, Patreon, our website at LitRPGpodcast.com, and also listen to us as a streaming show, either downloading from Spotify, Audible, or your local podcasting app for the LitRPG podcast. You also note here that our YouTube page has changed. Unfortunately, we had some issues with our last one that was labeled on the Geek Bites podcast website, which is the first podcast that I'd ever done. And so I just converted that YouTube page. That one got shut down by YouTube for some, in my opinion, bogus copyright infringement claims. All the stuff that I review falls under fair use, but a Korean company had issues with it. I'll still try to fight to get the page back, but at this point, I decided to switch over to the LitRPG podcast YouTube page, which is a separate entity with a different URL for YouTube, and I try to get back the 3,500 subscribers that we lost, and the 1,000 or more videos that we had posted to that other page. And so if you want to help us out, please subscribe to the new YouTube page with the new URL in the show notes, or just look for the LitRPG podcast on YouTube, and it'll hopefully send you to the new page, and we can try to make some ground back on I think 7-8 years at this point of work with the YouTube channel specifically. But we're definitely going in the process of re-uploading all the videos. We have all the videos already and all the show notes. It's just going to be a major pain in the behind to re-upload them all and adding all the show notes and re-link everything on our main page on the LitRPG podcast page. But please go join the new YouTube page if you want to help support us. Again, we also have links in the show notes to that, and also the Facebook pages where LitRPG authors and readers can gather and mingle together. And again, if you want to support us, just check out the YouTube page, or just check out the new book, The Mechanical Crafter 3, and go scroll through it. And I'd really appreciate that support as well. That book pays for the show, in addition to like your wonderful support that we get through your donations to the Patreon page, or donations and just your attention. So thanks again for hanging out with me this week, folks. And until we can hang out again, remember to go read some LitRPG. Goodbye, everybody.